Welcome all of you. I am Rosalind Mishra. Welcome to today's class of Environmental Sciences. In our previous classes, we were discussing about ecosystem, concept of ecosystem, structure and functions of ecosystem. So in today's class, we shall be continuing the previous class's topic, which is structure and function of ecosystem. So we shall be dealing with this topic in detail about what is the structure of ecosystem and how does it function. Alright. So before that, let us once again look into the contents of our environmental sciences subject, so that you will have a brief knowledge about this topic or about this unit of ecosystems. Like I said, in the previous class we were talking about concepts of ecosystem, wherein we talked about the abiotic and the biotic components. We discussed about them in detail. We've also talked about how abiotic components affect the biotic components, similarly vice versa, that is how biotic components affect the abiotic components. Okay. Apart from that, we shall also be reading in detail about introduction of certain ecosystems, types, characteristic features, structure and function of certain ecosystems, namely forest ecosystem, grassland ecosystem, desert ecosystem, aquatic ecosystem. Basically, ecosystems can be broadly divided into or broadly classified into two major classes, which is terrestrial ecosystem and aquatic ecosystem. Under terrestrial ecosystem, we have a broad variety of ecosystems, namely forest ecosystem, grassland ecosystem, desert ecosystem. Similarly, under aquatic ecosystem, again it is further subdivided into freshwater and marine ecosystems. As I said, the aquatic ecosystem is further divided into freshwater ecosystem and marine ecosystem. Under freshwater, we have ponds, lakes and river ecosystem. Similarly, under marine we have oceans and estuaries or backwater ecosystem. Okay. So, all of these topics we shall be dealing in detail one by one. Trust me, they are really interesting ones. Apart from this, in our previous class, we had also talked about how do we conserve ecosystem, how it is our responsibility to conserve our ecosystem, what are the methods by which we can make ourselves aware of the importance of the ecosystem right around us. Our surrounding is made up of a number of components of the ecosystem. How we need to make ourselves aware about each of those components, how each of those components play important role in our lives, okay, and how we could protect those components. This awareness is extremely essential for us in order to protect our own ecosystem, because we are surviving because of our surroundings, because of our environment. We are dependent on our environment is dependent upon us. So, it is a mutual relationship, we are mutually beneficial to each other. So, it is our duty to protect our ecosystem. Similarly, in the further topics, we shall be discussing about each of the ecosystems and how we could conserve them and how we are responsible in destroying those systems. Okay. So, once we know that how we are destroying, it will become easier for us to understand how we could conserve them. So, moving on further, before entering into the types of ecosystem, first let us understand about structure of an ecosystem. So, in today's class, I shall be dealing with the structural aspects of ecosystem. Apart from that, we will also learn about the functional aspects of the ecosystem. Under functional aspects, we have a lot of cycles. Okay, they are called as the energy cycles. So, we shall be learning about each of those cycles, namely, as you can see here in the slide, we shall be dealing with carbon cycle, oxygen cycle, nitrogen cycle, sulphur cycle and phosphorus cycle. So, we shall be learning in detail about each of these cycles. Okay. So, now let us move on to the structural aspects of ecosystem. Now, the components that make up the structural aspects of an ecosystem include the following matter. Number 1, inorganic aspects. Number 1, inorganic aspect or inorganic components, namely carbon, nitrogen, carbon dioxide and water. These are the inorganic components that make up our ecosystem, followed by the organic compounds. So, what are these organic compounds that make up our ecosystem? Namely proteins, carbohydrates, lipids. These are the macromolecules that link the abiotic components to the biotic components. Alright, so these are the macromolecules that are linking the abiotic components to the biotic ones. Now, as I told you, carbohydrate is the organic compound which is the starting or which is the basic for all the biotic components. From carbohydrates, they not only act as energy sources, they also act as starting material for the other macromolecules also. Okay. So, carbohydrate is a major organic component. Next, apart from inorganic aspects and organic components, we have other important aspects also, namely climatic regime. Climatic regime is a structural aspect of the ecosystem which affects its organisms, namely temperature, moisture, light, topography and producers of that ecosystem. Okay. So, what are the climatic regimes that are affecting our ecosystem or the survival of our ecosystem? Namely temperature, moisture, light and topography and the producers of that specific ecosystem. Next, apart from climatic regimes, the next aspect or the next structural aspect of an ecosystem which is of essentiality is macro consumers. Okay. Producers, we have plants etc. Okay. They are the producers. The next level of food chain are the consumers. Okay. Consumers, namely macro consumers. So, what are these macro consumers? Phagotrophs. They are large animals. Phagotrophs are the large animals. Okay. So, macro consumers also make up the major part of a structure of an ecosystem. Next, we have the micro consumers. The next level we have the macro consumers. Micro consumers, namely saprotrophs, absorber, fungi. Okay. Saprotrophs and fungi. Generally, these are the bacteria, fungi, basically microorganisms which are essential for decomposition of producers as well as consumers. So, they are an important part of the food chain. Next, moving on further, after discussing about the structural aspects, now we shall move on towards the functional aspects. Okay. We shall be talking about the functional aspect of an ecosystem. So, the functional aspects, the number one category which is essential for discussion is energy cycles. Okay. Energy cycles affect the functionality of an ecosystem. Hence, we shall be dealing with this in detail. Energy cycles affect the functionality of an ecosystem. There are various types of energy cycles, as we just saw the broader classification, that is carbon cycle, sulphur dioxide cycles, phosphorus cycles, nitrogen cycles, oxygen cycles, etc. Okay. So, these are the various energy cycles that are affecting our ecosystem. Apart from this, the next important aspect which is affecting the functionality of ecosystem is food chain. Food chain is generally made up of three major components: three major, I mean to say three major biotic components. I am not talking about the abiotic ones. Okay. Let us first discuss about the three major biotic components, starting with producers. They produce the food material for the consumers. Okay. So, producers, consumers and decomposers. Okay. Producers use the matter from the abiotic components. This production is taken up by the consumers. Okay. These consumers are decomposed via decomposers. These decomposers in turn return back the resources into the abiotic structure. Okay. So, basically it is a cycle, also known as food chain. The next important topic which deals with the functional aspect of ecosystem is diversity, interlinkage between organisms. The next one is, apart from diversity, interlinkage between organisms, another functional aspect is nutrient cycle or biogeochemical cycles. The last one is evolution, how the organisms are evolving according to the change in ecosystem or change in its environment. It is evolution. So, these are the 5 major functional aspects of ecosystem. What are they? Energy cycles, food chain, diversity interlinkages between organisms, nutrient cycle, biogeochemical cycles, evolution. Okay. So, these are the 5 major functional aspects of an ecosystem. Since each ecosystem has a non-living and a living part, okay, an ecosystem is made up of 2 components, non-living component and the living component. Non-living also known as the abiotic component and the living component, okay, that is the biotic component, that are linked to each other. Okay. So, this is basically an open system wherein the abiotic components dependent on biotic and biotic are vice versa dependent on the abiotic component. Now, one needs to look around us and observe this closely. It is essential for us to observe this interrelationship between the 2 components. This is an important aspect that is a vital part of our lives, because once we are aware about this interrelationship, it will be easier for us to conserve the functionality of this interrelationship. So, with this we move on a little further. After discussing about the functional aspect, let us just see in brief about the structure of an ecosystem. Now, an ecosystem has 2 components, as already discussed several times, the biotic component consisting of living things and the abiotic portion consisting of elements that are not alive. Okay. So, an ecosystem has 2 components, a biotic component consisting of living things and an abiotic component or an abiotic portion consisting of elements that are not alive. The non-living constituents are said to include the following category. Okay. We have been talking about abiotic components. What are these abiotic components? Namely, habitat, okay, gases, solar radiation, temperature, moisture, inorganic and organic nutrients. All these together make up the abiotic component. I repeat again, the abiotic components are namely the habitat in which the organism is living in, gases, various gases like sulphur dioxide, oxygen, nitrogen, number of phosphorus, all sort of gases, solar radiation, that is the sun's energy which is reaching the earth, solar radiation, temperature, the temperature of our surrounding, moisture, inorganic and organic nutrients. Okay. So, all of these components are the abiotic components. All of this make up the abiotic components. Now, the living organism may be divided into producers, consumers and decomposers. Now, let us see matter and cycles of matter. Let us understand in detail about matter and the cycles of matter, or the energy cycle, or as we had already discussed here, nutrient cycles or the energy cycles. So, here if you see matter and cycles of matter, the biogeochemical cycle describes the circulation of matter. Okay. The inorganic and the organic constituents, how they are circulated among the producers, consumers, decomposers, and then back to the abiotic factors. Okay. So, this is called as the cycle of matter, also known as biogeochemical cycle. Particularly plants and animal nutrients, how they are cycled through the ecosystem is the biogeochemical cycle. These cycles are ultimately powered by solar energy. They are fine tuned and directed by energy expanded by organisms. In a sense, the solar energy powered hydrologic cycle acts as an endless conveyor belt to move materials essential for life through the ecosystem. Okay. So, what do we mean by this is, the solar energy or the sun's energy acts as the initiator for this very important and very powerful cycle. The solar energy power packed by hydrological cycle or hydrological cycle, both of this together run this whole ecosystem. Okay. That is, I will just show you how. The solar energy produces heat. So, this leads to transpiration from the vegetation. The vegetations, the producers and consumers, they transpire water in the form of sweat, in the form of perspiration or transpiration from the vegetation. That is, the water reaches the atmosphere again. Similarly, water from river in the form of moisture reaches into the atmosphere due to the sun's heat. So, this is affecting transpiration, this is affecting evaporation from rivers, evaporation from sea. Okay. So, you can see how solar energy is running this cycle of energy. Okay. First, from the vegetation, from rivers and from sea, water is evaporated back into the atmosphere, as well as from lake. Water is being evaporated back from the towards the atmosphere. After that, from this atmosphere, it runs down or it comes down back into our earth's atmosphere, into our earth system in the form of rain, or in the form of snow. Okay. So, this is a very important aspect which we need to understand, how solar energy powered by hydrologic cycle acts as an endless conveyor to move materials essential for life through this ecosystem. Okay. So, this is a very important aspect. So, next, moving on further, most biogeochemical cycles can be described as elemental cycles. Okay. Most of these biogeochemical cycles can be described as elemental cycles involving nutrient elements, namely carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, sulphur and phosphorus. Okay. So, when we are talking about biogeochemical cycles, we are talking about the major elements which are getting cycled. What are these major elements? Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, sulphur and phosphorus. Okay. So, many of these are gaseous cycles in which the element in question spends part of the cycle in atmosphere, example oxygen, nitrogen and carbon. Other notably, the phosphorus cycle do not have a gaseous component and are called sedimentary cycles. All sedimentary cycles involve salt solutions or soil solutions that contain dissolved substances which are leached from the weathered minerals that may be deposited as mineral cycles. They mainly have hydrogen sulphide or sulphur oxide in the gaseous phase, or minerals such as calcium sulphate in the solid phase. Now, we will look at the carbon cycle. Let us look at the carbon cycle. Carbon is the basic building block of life molecule. It is circulated through the carbon cycle. This cycle shows that carbon may be present as gaseous atmospheric carbon dioxide, which is dissolved in groundwater as hydrocarbonates, or which is dissolved in groundwater as carbonates, or molecular carbon dioxide in underlying rock strata as limestones in the form of calcium carbonate, and as organic matter represented in a simplified manner as calcium oxides. Photosynthesis fixes inorganic carbon as biological carbon, which is constituent of all life molecules. An important aspect of the carbon cycle is that it is the cycle by which energy is transferred to biological system. Organic or biological carbon is an energy rich molecule that can react biochemically with molecular oxygen. In order to regenerate carbon dioxide and produce energy, this can occur in an organism as shown by the decay reaction, or it may takes place as combustion, such as wood when it is burnt. Moving on further. So, this is the carbon cycle. Okay, you can see from water, from fossil fuel, from earth in the form of decay or death of animals and plants, the carbon dioxide is reaching its ultimate form. Next, we have the oxygen cycle. The oxygen cycle involves interchange of oxygen between elemental form of gas in the atmosphere and chemically bound O in carbon dioxide and water and organic matter. Elemental oxygen becomes chemically bound by various yielding processes, particularly combustion and metabolic process in organisms. It is released during photosynthesis. So, this is a cycle in which by photosynthesis carbon dioxide in the form of carbon dioxide, water and respiration, oxygen is getting involved. Next, we have nitrogen cycle. Though constituting much less of biomass than carbon or oxygen, it is an essential constituent of proteins. The atmosphere is 78% by volume elemental nitrogen and constitute an inexhaustible reservoir of this element. The nitrogen molecule is very stable, so that breaking it down to atoms that can be incorporated in inorganic and organic chemical forms of nitrogen is the limiting step. It is a difficult step. This does occur by highly energetic processes in lightning discharges, such that nitrogen becomes chemically combined with hydrogen or oxygen in the form of ammonia or nitrogen oxides. Here we have a cycle for the nitrogen cycle, wherein the elemental nitrogen reaches the atmospheric nitrogen either through fixation by plants or by decomposition, ammonification from animals and by several bacteria. Next, we have phosphorus cycle. It is crucial because phosphorus is usually the limiting nutrient in ecosystem. There are no common stable gaseous forms of phosphorus. So, the phosphorus cycle is strictly sedimentary. In the geosphere, phosphorus is held largely in poorly soluble minerals such as hydroxyapatite. Soluble phosphorus from this mineral and other sources such as fertilizers is taken up by plants and incorporated into the nucleic acid of its biomass. Okay. So, this is the way phosphorus is being circulated. The last cycle, we have sulphur cycle, which is relatively complex. It involves several gaseous species, poorly soluble minerals and several species in solution. It is involved with the oxygen cycle. In that, the sulphur combines with oxygen to form sulphur dioxide, which is an atmospheric pollutant, and soluble sulphate ions. Among the significant species involved in the sulphur cycles are gaseous sulphur oxide, mineral sulfides such as lead sulfides, sulphuric acid and main constituent of acid rain, and biologically bound sulphur in sulphur containing proteins. So, this was our sulphur cycle. With this, I would end this class. Let's await the next class. Thank you.